Welcome to Innovation in Government, presented by Carasoft. This program is from TechNet Cyber, presented by AFCEA International at the Baltimore Convention Center. I'm your host, Francis Rose. Over the next hour, you'll meet leaders from the Defense Department's Office of the Chief Information Officer, the Defense Information Systems Agency, and Joint Force Headquarters DoD Information Network, and leaders from industry that are supporting the Pentagon's cyber community. The director of DISA and commander of JFHQ Doden, Lieutenant General Robert Skinner, spoke to FedGov today at TechNet Cyber about what he calls velocity of action. He applies that term to everything his agencies do, including cyber defense. Steve Jasna is director at Carasoft. He says two themes at this conference stand out to him.
One is critical infrastructure protection, so protecting our critical infrastructure against, nation-state actors, specifically, the emergence of Vault Typhoon. The second one is the adoption of zero trust platforms and the ever-expanding sort of verticals of identity, right, and identity access management. I also see the evolution sort of ransomware and malware that's sort of being jump-started by AI, right? And these AI attacks are becoming harder to sort of manage, especially around phishing. Some of these things look very, very real. So I think AI is going to be a theme sort of across all the verticals, within cybersecurity. I also expect to talk a little bit about sort of the future of cyber protection, like quantum security. So this idea of a quantum computer being able to sort of break down an encryption algorithm. So pretty scary stuff. I don't think we've seen a lot of that play out yet, but I think it's absolutely something that's on the horizon here.
The discussion about quantum is interesting to me because a lot of people are talking about it, applying the term in a number of different ways to a number of different concepts. What does quantum mean in the security realm?
Yeah, it means using very high-powered computers to break down sophisticated encryption algorithms, right? Like cracking these algorithms much faster than any other bad actor or hacker could. In some cases, they can do it in minutes or hours, which is very, very scary.
And the challenge, I suppose, is, as with artificial intelligence, we have these tools in order to be able to defend. They have them in order to be able to attack. And so that tension, I imagine, just continues to escalate. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. I look at it too, if you go back to, AI, there's AI for good and AI for bad. We talked about, some of the ways it's being used for bad, but it can also be used for good, especially around cyber resiliency, incident response. How do you respond quicker and faster to an attack or a breach? We're seeing a lot of the companies in the endpoint detection and response space are starting to use AI for good. So I think that's going to be a big battleground, over the next few years, is AI for good versus AI for bad.
When we don't know, and maybe it's not knowable, what degree of success the bad guys have, or what degree of capability the bad guys have with their AI, how do we determine what's good enough for now and how much we need to continue to grow? Or is that maybe the wrong question, and just growth as fast as possible is key?
Yeah, I really think it's growth as fast as possible and learning and adopting as much of it as we can. And also taking a page out of threat intelligence and understanding, all the different threat intelligence platforms that are out there. And these companies have gone in and done all the really hard labor of finding that cyber data so that our government customers and the private sector can stay one step ahead of the attackers.
Steve Jasna of Carasoft. Joint Force Headquarters DoD Information Network says its mission is to, quote, lead DoD's unified force approach to network operations, security, and defense across the Department of Defense Information Network. I asked the Deputy Commander of JFHQ Doden, Brigadier General Heather Blackwell, U.S. Air Force, how the mission of Doden has evolved over time.
The mission of DODEN has been consistent since it started. So Joint Force Headquarters DODEN is 9 years old. Our mission is to secure, operate, and defend this thing we call the DODEN, which, as my boss, General Skinner, will talk about, is the third largest network in the world. So the mission has continued to stay the same, but the nature of the DODEN has drastically evolved as technology changes, as you alluded to. So as we add OT, as we add cloud environments, as we add mission partner environments, the nature of what we need to secure and defend has drastically changed, even though our mission has not. Why does that matter? It matters because the technology that we need to use to put sensors on those different environments is different. Collecting that data is important, but also making sure that we have a workforce trained to secure, operate, and defend all those different terrains that we call the DODEN is a continuing challenge.
You mentioned mission partner environments, and I imagine the ingress and egress of data across those networks is maybe one of the biggest challenges you're dealing with right now?
It is absolutely a huge challenge. We can't secure everything. So making sure that we focus on the data and securing that data is how we're going to maintain a position of advantage against our adversary. But as you described, mission partner environments, that's how we're going to fight in the future. Everybody kept saying, we're going to use CyberNet as our warfighting platform. It's actually mission partner environments because that is where all of our allies and partners also come together. So how do we secure that data and make sure that we continue to flow and communicate with our allies and partners?
What are the implications in all of that for the way that you defend? You mentioned the defense as part of the mission. How has that changed over time, the way that you defend that network based on the way that things have changed?
So the recent evolution that I have seen is there has been, I would say maybe an over-reliance on what we call CPTs, cyber protection teams, that go out and defend certain pieces of that terrain. However, I would argue that those CSSPs, those forces that are on the terrain every single day, we need to invest in them, again, give them the training, give them the technology, because they're familiar with that terrain. So if we can really raise the bar on the level of experience for those forces out there defending every day, that's going to make us a stronger force. And then if I need to bring in a cyber protection team to do that exquisite analysis, I have all of those forces in reserve to be able to do that when needed.
It sounds like one of the most important tools. With a show like this, it's tempting to talk about tool stuff. It sounds like one of your most important tools is what's between the ears of the people that are on those teams.
Oh, yes, sir. And that's a passion of mine, is the people. And you even heard General Hawk talk about it. We can put all the tools out there. We can have big data platforms. We can have data streaming, and you can even overlay, artificial intelligence. Let's sprinkle some other buzzwords of zero trust, all of it. But it's the people that are going to help us win the nation's wars.
What do you need those people to be able to do now that maybe you didn't before, and what do you anticipate needing them to be able to do in the future that they might not have to do today, skill-wise or talent-wise?
For me, I am one of those people that loves STEAM, right? You hear in the past, STEM programs. I'm a STEAM person that brings in the arts because I need people to think creatively. These are going to be some wicked problems that we have to solve in the future. So if I can have people who are passionate about what they do and can think very creatively in how we can solve these problems, that is how we're going to win. And we hear a lot about diversity. For me, it is diversity of thought and how you approach the problem that is most important to me.
We've talked about zero trust and a lot of discussion here about zero trust. What does that look like from the DODEN perspective as the department aims at 2027?
That is a very tricky question, right? Because even you look at some of the major companies, they've been on a zero trust journey for years. So I do a shout out to the DoD CIO and the CIO team as they really try to push us towards a zero trust environment. But it's hard, and we have to do it deliberately. We have to do it on the most important things. We can't do the entire zero trust architecture all at once. So what are the most important things, identity, management, et cetera, that we need to focus on, and we need to focus on it from a joint environment. I can't have the Air Force doing one thing that's different from the Army, that's different from the Marines. So how do we move on this journey, but we do it together as an entire DoD force?
That's the J part of the Joint
Force Headquarters DoD.
That's right. That's right. How do you oversee all of that to make sure that those pieces stay connected?
We are an operational C2 headquarters. So it is our job to synchronize all of the efforts, not only from our services, but also what we call the DAOs, the Doden Areas of Operation, which we actually have 45 owners of different parts of the Doden across this massive network. So you look at organizations like DECA, that don't really have cyber as their core mission, but cybersecurity is still critical to what they do. So we try to communicate, synchronize all of the efforts across all of the 45 DAOs to make sure that we're heading in the same direction and sharing the exquisite intel the NSA provides us to help secure and operate and defend this terrain.
Brigadier General Heather Blackwell, U.S. Air Force of JFHQ Doden. Cyber defense and artificial intelligence commanded most of the buzz at TechNet Cyber this year. Using AI for cybersecurity and securing AI tools and the data that feed them were the main categories of discussion. Jonathan Album is Federal Chief Technology Officer at ServiceNow. He says there are two ways government agencies should think about cyber and AI.
Start with how do we take advantage of these technologies in the cyberspace? I think a strong defense can be, your best offense. And so often that's about running a really secure infrastructure in the first place, having a strong approach to IT operations management and using these tools to help us understand what our environments really look like. We can train AIs to help us understand when we're deviating from normal. There's so much activity on these networks. And if we are required as practitioners to investigate every single thing that looks anomalous, we spend a lot of time chasing down maybe a false positive. So when the AI knows what normal looks like and can be very accurate in saying this isn't normal, there's something going on, we can train our limited resources right where it needs to be. And when we continue to train these AIs to understand what good cyber defense looks like, we can go from prevention into detection, like I said. But now, how do we respond when these incidents are happening? An AI can go in there and make recommendations, or maybe even through automation, isolate a machine that's pinging a bad address, or give us the intelligence to take a group of machines offline, or go into an email system, pull out phishing emails or other kinds of things. And then maybe in an unfortunate situation we've lost data and we have to recover. And an AI can get us started down that process. And ultimately, the humans are involved in this. Human in the loop with all these things, I think, at this point. But we want those humans to be as effective and focused as possible. And I think those are the real positive things that I'm hearing, and about ways that agencies in the DoD and across government are thinking about using these systems.
What are you seeing agencies doing with the people who are freed up now from doing the mundane, repetitive tasks that AI permits them to not have to do anymore? Where's that human bandwidth going?
Well, for a long time we've said we want people focused on the high value work. So I think you're asking what's the real high value work when it comes to cyber. Sometimes it's as simple as understanding what are all of these processes that are going on in this organization. How is this data being used? Where is it? How does it flow across the organization? What's the impact of these systems? And having a better view of the organization has been something that we've been after for a long time as CIOs and leaders in IT environments. I think we could train those resources, one, to use AI sometimes to help us with that, but that becomes a priority and a focus for an organization, as opposed to I'm constantly in this response mode and I'm fighting another fire and I don't have time to get my head around what am I actually managing and what does it all mean. I think that's a great use for people's time. Comprehensively as we free them up over these.
I'm going to take us back to one of the conversations that you and I had when you were still the CIO at the Agriculture Department. We talked about cyber, and I asked you in that conversation, could we get to a point ever where cybersecurity becomes a proactive exercise for the federal government instead of a reactive exercise? And it sounds like you're saying now that AI can help you and your peers across government to get there.
100%. If we're able to make that pivot, we can be, on the offense, right? When these bad things are happening. And there's bad things happening all the time. There's thousands and thousands of attacks every hour. or attempts. And if we're able to be on the offense, you have far fewer of those have an impact. I do think there's one other piece with this AI conversation that we can lose track of, right? We cannot let the technology outpace the humanity, right? So people have to stay in the loop. I mentioned human in the loop before. We can't get to the point where agency leaders bring in these technologies and say it's a panacea. We don't have to worry any longer. And there's a small fear that I have that we get to the point where that's happening, and we start to negate the need for people in these roles, and we're going to start staffing other things. We can't back off at this point on having the right people with the right training in these positions. And at the same time, the AI is making decisions or it's mitigating a risk. Those decisions have to be understandable by the people in that security office. That has to have some transparency, and that's part of the cyber EO, right? Transparency and observability. And so much of that is can get lost in this conversation. We got to come back to the person. It always comes back to people. And I think if we're doing those kinds of things, AI becomes a real beneficial capability. We know the bad guys are using it. They're writing very sophisticated phishing emails or thinking about ways to avoid the systems we have in place to prevent them. The AI can help with that. So we really have to be on top of our game and remain ever vigilant, even with these additional great tools.
Jonathan Album of ServiceNow. It doesn't take long for artificial intelligence to come up in any conversation about cybersecurity in the defense community. Jim Smid is Federal Chief Technology Officer for DoD and Intel at Palo Alto Networks. He says even though the discussion around AI and cyber is relatively new, the actual use of the technology has been around for a long time.
A lot of that's with machine learning, doing pattern recognition and anomaly detection. But I think it's really important that the government be able to take advantage of these to kind of accelerate the time that they can detect things, the time they can respond, and to really eliminate some of the manual processes and things that we do. We really have to be able to respond for cybersecurity at machine speeds and not rely just on operators looking at screens and detecting alerts and trying to decipher root cause.
What does that automation allow the workforce to be able to shift to, since they don't have to sit and just stare at those screens and look for those patterns themselves?
Well, I think you have to first look at the sheer volume. We're seeing just net new attacks over 1.7 million a day, and that means zero-day attacks that haven't ever been seen before. You have to use artificial intelligence to identify those, and the sheer volume of that means the days of having an operator looking at a screen and detecting the sheer volume of the alerts coming through, that has to be eliminated. You have to automate that. And a lot of times you have these different sources of the alerts, and the alerts themselves may be innocuous in and of themselves. They may get passed over or get lost in the noise. What's important is that all of these alerts can get stitched together, so correlating those and normalizing the data and being able to recognize that they all mean something when looked at as a whole. So boiling down the sheer volume of alerts into something that's manageable for the operators, giving them something that is actionable and oftentimes can be automated. So repetitive tasks from an automation perspective should be eliminated as much as possible and make the manpower as effective and efficient as you can.
What's your view of the intersection of those cybersecurity concepts that AI is driving and the zero trust goal that the Defense Department has set for itself to get to by 2027?
I like to think that artificial intelligence needs to be built into the entire zero trust architecture. Every single tool has it. You don't buy artificial intelligence in and of itself. It's embedded in all the different tools. And it's really important first that you have the sheer amount of data that you need, so being able to collect all the data. Secondly, being able to normalize that data and put it in a place that it can be shared. And third, how do you correlate all of that data? So zero trust is really only effective when you have a platform that's tightly integrated, it's leveraging artificial intelligence, and it's giving you automation built in so that you can eliminate those repetitive tasks. And it's the only way that really zero trust is effective and efficient.
You get to a point there that I think is as much philosophical or conceptual as tactical, and that is you don't just buy an artificial intelligence thing. It's woven into the tools that the Defense Department and the civilian agencies are using.
Absolutely. We've been doing artificial intelligence and tools for over a decade. That's certainly accelerated. I think that's where most innovation you're going to see in cybersecurity will happen over the next 3 to 5 years. You're going to see that built into every tool. And it's a lot different than it used to be, where we used to have machine learning to identify pattern recognition and things like that. We're starting to leverage these large language models, generative AI, be able to have co-pilots where you can make operators more effective. And I think that's really critical for our DoD customers, because a lot of times, first, you don't have a lot of operators, and from an experience standpoint, you need to make them fast and effective as quickly as possible. So being able to use these co-pilots and best practices and have that at your fingertips is critical.
How do you tell your government partners to accelerate the learning curve to build those people that understand how to use these tools effectively?
Yeah, I think the tools themselves, by building large language models and being able to use natural language in the tools themselves, being able to have recommendations and co-pilots on best practices, that's what gets them up to speed very quickly. They can go and see what the CLI, for example, might look like to do something, but to have it the easy button where you can be effective and you can do very sophisticated remediation without having to know exactly what you're doing in the very beginning, I think that's a critical part of it.
Jim Smid of Palo Alto Networks. Government leaders at TechNet Cyber say they will rely on their industry partners more and more as the cyber landscape becomes more complex. Steve Wallace is Chief Technology Officer at the Defense Information Systems Agency. He tells me what he sees now in that collaboration.
From the side where we're seeing companies integrate more into their COTS products, we're seeing a lot of integration across there. A lot of, not just everyone is excited right now about large language models, but beyond large language models, we're seeing the use of AI across the board, whether it be in endpoint defense, whether it be in the SIMs, and the way that our analysts interact with data on the backside. We're even seeing it in terms of browser defense and the way that companies are looking at the way that people are browsing the web and then looking for phishing attacks and that sort of thing. The phishing attacks have gotten extremely, extremely good. And we're seeing benefits to the use of AI there. We've seen it play out in real life so far. So that's one side where we're seeing the commercial or the COTS integration. And then there's the other side. There's the chatbot sort of approach that people are very interested in these days. We've got a couple of chatbot prototypes starting, looking to open one up to the DISA workforce later this summer, end of this summer, to let them start interacting with it, and then go larger with the potential for department-wide. We're also looking at models that are trained on not just your typical data set, but also security data sets. We're seeing more of that, where you have these large language models that are trained on security-specific data, and we see that working to our analyst benefits. In general, I see our analysts getting the greatest bang for the buck, if you will, out of this explosion.
You've already used the words large language models several times in this conversation. Why are people excited about LLM inside DISA?
People are excited because a lot of times I'll talk about it as a way to have somebody ride side saddle with you, right? It'll help you can summarize documents. You can, that predictive analysis of text is really useful to this have across the whole spectrum of our agency, whether it be contract writing, whether it be the analysis of accreditation packages. I mean, that's one of the big areas that I could see us leveraging a large language model too, is people turn in accreditation packages. Someone on the other side has to triage said package and then move it forward and then go back and forth in the event. We're looking at a prototype to possibly evaluate the package, to do the triage instantaneously. That creates relief on both sides of the equation, helps things to move faster. So there's benefit all around to the workforce from top to bottom.
Last time you and I were together was at an AFCEA DC lunch, and you talked about quantum there.
Yes.
People are using that term in a number of different ways. How do you use it at DISA? Noun or adjective? What and to describe what, if so?
Yeah. So for us, we're mainly focused on the threat that quantum poses to cryptography. And the hard part is there's not a given set date on the calendar when quantum's going to become real. It's been 5 years out for approximately 10 years. But we are seeing the companies making the investments, making large leaps in terms of the number of qubits that they're able to process. And while there's no direct agreement on how many qubits it'll take to crack specific encryption, we know that it'll eventually happen. And we can't wait for that to happen to react. So from DISA's perspective, we're very focused on the crypto side of things and how we prepare. Now, at the same time, NIST is still working through their finalization of the algorithms, but we are prepping ourselves through. We have a prototype going on right now, but we are prepping ourselves to be able to accept those and start to roll those out when things are approved and start to implement. So we're in a learning phase right now while we wait for the finalization. But it's a space that we're very excited in, and again, it takes time to roll these things over. It will take years, so we need to get after it sooner rather than later.
We have about a minute left. How does, and this could be philosophical or tactical, how does one know that one is on the right track when, for example, with quantum, you don't know when that kind of critical mass will be reached,
yes,
and you don't know exactly what that critical mass will entail, what the opponent will potentially have to use against you.
And that's exactly it. The opponent will likely not stand up and wave the flag and say, we've achieved quantum and we can crack all of your crypto. So the director's remarks about velocity to action is critical. We have to push, we have to go as quickly as possible because of that threat that they will potentially sit on data even now to decrypt later. The threat is very real, and it's there right now, and we need action from all of industry, from all of government in order to help safeguard our data.
Steve Wallace of DISA. The Defense Department says it's on track to implement its zero trust strategy by fiscal year 2027. That strategy encompasses the entire DoD. Matt Topper is president of Uber Ether. He says that strategy might not be named well.
The zero trust moniker is really wrong, right? It should really be defined trust. And what I've seen over the last few years is that resiliency of multi-provider standards-based has actually been falling apart as we've moved towards zero trust. And there's a lot of, well, if we go buy this vendor solution, it'll solve it all. And the problem is, that's great until you meet in the field and that other group you're meeting with has a different vendor solution. And they're like, well, if you just download their client and our client, or copy all of your data to our data, it'll work fine. And that's not how trust ever even works in the real world. So we've started to really lose a lot of this idea of resiliency, where it doesn't matter what cloud provider you're on. It doesn't matter what piece of hardware you're running in a data center or in a backpack on someone's kit, because the pressure's mounting and we're losing, we've got to get it done, but some of that core engineering to be resilient of, hey, if a provider gets hacked, we need to be able to operate tomorrow on another one, or be able to pivot and rekey an entire network in under an hour. That's really the resilient factor that we need.
Yeah, it's an interesting definition because I think it's an evolution of the way people think about resiliency. I think for a long time, especially in the cyber realm, it revolved around how fast can we recover if we get hit. And what you're describing is partly that, but certainly not entirely that, it sounds like.
Absolutely. You don't have time to recover anymore. Right? We look at a lot of the breaches that have happened in the last year, and it's a flip of a switch, right? They're encrypting machines with ransomware across an entire network. We just saw last week with the automotive industry, not only the provider, but thousands of dealerships within an hour. They were all encrypted and locked, that nothing is working. And in a military setting within the DoD, we don't have that ability to stop the fight and say, oh, we got a problem, don't attack us. And having that resiliency of, hey, we can rekey this whole thing, all of our machine-to-machine identity pieces. We don't care where it runs. We don't care which Kubernetes platform we're on, or even if we're on Kubernetes, we can say that's compromised. We're under an attack for an hour, but in an hour, all of it will be cleared out.
What are the steps that you're seeing organizations take to reach that vision that you just laid out? And are they the right steps that you think that those organizations should be taking to get to the end state that you described?
Yeah, I think 3 years ago, agencies were making that decision of which cloud provider are we going to pick? Is it going to be Amazon? Is it going to be Azure? Is it going to be GCP or something else? And today they've started to realize it's all of them, right? With the push of AI, different tools, technologies, different partnerships, they realize to meet their mission need, they have to find a way. So it's starting to emerge with this idea of how do we have the same security profiles, the same policies across all of these different providers and know we're secure, and then looking to continually manage, maintain in a consistent way no matter where they go.
How do you help your government partners understand where they are in the timeline and what they still need to do in order to achieve whether their goals are revolving around zero trust mandates or some cloud migration or some other type of digital modernization or whatever?
Yeah, so what our organization has done is we've traditionally focused on the identity and access management side, which everyone looks to this user pillar in zero trust, but it really goes to machines and devices. But we've taken a lot of the best of breed vendors who are multi-cloud capable and ability to run offline or in traditional data centers and brought them together as a package that an agency can say, here's the best practices that follow FAR clauses, that follow all the things that should be doing, and we get them to an optimized level within months versus having to have a team that's integrating that over years and then continuing to maintain.
Mm-hmm. How do you help, how does someone evaluate where they are in order to understand when they sit down with somebody like you to be able to tell you, this is what we have, this is what we need, or maybe we don't know what we need, but we know where we want to go?
Yeah, so a lot of it is what we do with our customers is sit down and you just have to dig in. You can't do an inventory because you could have bought the best product in the world, but the implementation is garbage. Or they just left the front door wide open and never even put a lock on it. So you have to sit down and say, here's minimum standard, here's as you move up to an optimized level, where you need to be and help them build that roadmap and the places where, and every agency, depending on their mission, has a different risk point of where the attackers are going to come in and those entry points where they're most likely to happen. So you might have to push here faster and harder than pushing on this one. It's not the same for everyone, but we'll come in, look at it, go, okay, here's what you have, here's things that are quick fixes, and then here's the plan to actually get you where you need to be.
Matt Topper of Uber Ether. An attendee at TechNet Cyber could walk the show floor and see a lot of new booths from vendors with solutions to show government and from government looking to connect with industry. Bill Lemons is Director of Solutions Architecture and Systems Engineering at Fortinet Federal. He says the constant evolution of the roster of cyber players isn't surprising.
There's a lot of new players in that particular space, and you have to just give it a try. I see a lot of pilot activity, just testing the waters, if you will, just to see whether or not the concept and the expectations can truly meet the hype.
Mm-hmm. The pilot programs that the department is working on, how have you seen those kinds of things scale? Not necessarily in the Defense Department, and maybe not even necessarily regarding zero trust, but at some point the department will have to scale those. How do you advise people to do that effectively?
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest challenges, right? If you take a small, kind of measured approach to take a look at the underlying capabilities, that question of scale still remains somewhat unanswered, especially if you're not sure that particular vendor has references or has examples of the fact that they've been able to, scale to certain sizes. So I think a slow, methodic process, really monitoring not only the progress of how to meet those particular milestones, but also meet those security gates and truly understanding that the intent is actually being delivered on as the scale out begins is going to be a really challenging and an important part of that scale out process.
That intent, I think, is the key word in the statement that you just made, because that's the ultimate question that it strikes me that the department should be asking itself. Are we getting what we set out to get? Oh, how does one measure that over time, in your view? There's obviously the milepost, the 2027 goal for the department regarding zero trust, but you don't want to wait till 2027 to make sure that you're on track.
Yeah, I think in the guidance itself, it really talks about kind of the cyclic process, right? Making sure that you not only deploy, but you also assess. And when you assess, whether it's a scorecard, whether it's a checklist, whatever it is, making sure that you take those metrics, understand what those gaps may be, if you start to see gaps in the approach itself, and be open. I mean, I really never saw, when the guidance originally came out, the idea that Zero Trust was going to be a product. I knew it was an approach. It was changing the mindset of how to deploy systems and how to ensure that visibility that could be gained could be leveraged to provide appropriate access levels to data, and that landscape is going to continue to change over time. So hopefully those opportunities to gather that additional feedback from the environment, go against those checklists, identify those gaps, and look for complementary systems and platforms that can help fill those gaps.
You mentioned a moment ago the landscape will change over time. Do you have any sense of what it may look like in the future, or is it even knowable to know what the landscape might look like in the future?
I think the only thing that you can really count on is change.
Yeah.
Knowing what it's going to look like is, I heard a few people talk about the fact that no one really has a crystal ball.
Yeah.
So it's really hard to pull that one out. But definitely, being thoughtful, being mindful, being vigilant, and watching the trends, getting an understanding of what everything that is deployed is actually doing for you, and what its limits are, and being willing to understand that process is going to be continual. It's a journey that has no end. It's one that is just going to have to move. You hope to move it forward, right? That's really the goal, and kind of the heart of the Zero Trust architecture in general, is that continual improvement.
Bill Lemons of Fortinet Federal. One of the top transformation leaders at the Defense Information Systems Agency has a new mission. Tanisha McMillan's new job is Director of Operations Plans and Exercises. I ask her about her view of her new team.
We're really the center of gravity for DISA as I see it. And when I say that, I mean operations really is in the center of what we're doing to operate, defend, and secure the DoDIN. And so my team within the J3 is responsible for operational support, operational terrain across the agency. You probably heard the director talk about DAO DISA and the importance of that. And so my J3 team is responsible for ensuring that they are giving measured and proactive predictive analysis on how we are supporting and really driving to be ahead of our competitors and our adversaries, really, from a 3 perspective. And then our 5, which I see is the pole in the middle of all of this, is our strategy. We have implemented a new strategy for DISA, and my team is responsible for really driving that strategy across the FIDUP and more, but moreover ensuring the alignment of all the acquisitions, programs, and capabilities that are aligning to that strategy. And so been really spending a lot of time making sure people understand, and that's even with our partners and our federal partners. Do our vendors even understand where we're headed as an organization? I think that's really important for partnerships, public and private. That is very key. Mm-hmm. And then on our 7 side of the house, responsible for all the exercises globally and readiness. So our mission essential tasks that we do in support of Joint Staff. That team has been energized in making sure not only that we have a seat at the table for those exercises that are occurring, but that we are really driving the use cases from an exercise perspective. And so I'm energized of how we're supporting in the organization, and definitely since the last time we've talked, been fully ingrained in this new team as a part of the organization.
You said something there a moment ago I thought was interesting. You want to make sure that your vendors really understand where you're headed. What's your sense as you're at a place like this where you have a chance to talk to them one-on-one or in groups? of whether they do have a good sense of where you're headed, or whether you want to tweak the way that you're conveying that to them.
No, I appreciate the question. I would offer that there's probably more clarity that's needed on what we're meaning by the words in our strategy document. And the reason I say that is not for a quiz for any of them, but do you understand those goals and those imperatives that are within that strategy plan? And how do you interpret based off the tools and capabilities that you have to propel that mission? And I hear varying perspectives on it that leads me to believe I think we could do a better job of driving that conversation, but moreover spending intentional time to make sure that they're understanding what it is that we're marching towards. Mm-hmm. The reason I think that that's important is as we're driving of this partnership and interconnected tissue with our vendors, they've got to understand where we're headed. To be able to deliver and offer up some opportunities for us to drive. And I think that starts with a common lexicon and clear and concise understanding of that strategy. So
you've got some pretty clear guidelines there for what you think your deliverables are to them. What would you like to see industry do better to serve you in the needs in your new job, but broadly to serve DISA as an agency better?
Absolutely. So I'll offer this. So my first day in the job, I went down to our battle captain into the pit, right? And I was curious on what their day looked like. I was curious on how they were looking at a variety of data and tools and capabilities. And what I quickly realized is they have the tools, but a lot of it is manual in them to have to traverse that. And so automation is something that I've been speaking to a lot of the vendors here that I could really use their help in ensuring that we're automating a lot of the data that we're coming in that frees up the opportunity for them to critically think about our risk posture, critically think about where we need to be postured as an organization, and how has that risk changed from yesterday to today. As you can imagine, those adversaries are not stopping on their side of the house. And so we've got to do a better job of predictive analysis. And I think automation and AI is a key tool to get after it.
Tanisha McMillan of DISA. The discussions at TechNet Cyber this year were pretty evenly focused on strategy and tactics. The tactical discussions dealt mostly with how to handle the changing cyber landscape. Chris Stuntz is solutions architect for Equinix. He tells me how he sees that landscape changing over time.
Well, traditionally, you got the ransomware attacks, you've had the insider threats, social engineering, more traditional. Now with, like, for example, all the CSPs, cloud providers, AWS and Azure, you have to worry about cloud security. And another one is IoT attacks. So you have a lot of Internet of Things, refrigerators, microwaves, everything's pretty much going online. So that just opens the door for more vulnerabilities because there's different software, different vendors, different hardware, printers, all that good stuff. But for the evolving ones, or you have the AI-driven stuff now coming out. Advanced persistent threats, kind of like state-sponsored. It's big, actually. I think Stuxnet was 2010 was pretty much the largest and most expensive malware version, kind of a combination of that. Then you have the cyber physical attacks. Kind of the same thing with Stuxnet, did. It went after the Iranian program. Then you have, power utilities, water facilities, data centers, example. So all those things, it's not just a one-tier layer, physical security, insider threats, social engineering, cyber, everything else. So it's kind of a multi-tiered, ever-evolving, ever-changing that businesses have to adapt to go from there. So,
what kind of questions are your government partners asking you about infrastructure and how they can build and defend infrastructure that kind of defends against some of those kinds of threats?
Physical security is always the big one. We're FISMA high for most of our facilities, so they want to know about basic physical security, accreditation, government guidelines, stuff like that meets. So everything has to be, because they have their own guidelines and accreditations they have to deal with. So whenever they move from their own facilities, for example, to vendors like Equinix, they have to meet those guidelines for the transition so they can do their part. So.
Is that changing? Are the things that they are wondering about or needing to know about changing as a result of the changes that you talked about in the threat landscape?
Yeah, because a few years ago when CSP, cloud became the buzzword, everyone was migrating to the cloud. And then due to cost and everything else, they're kind of coming back a little bit on that. So they want to either do their own data center and or use vendors like us, third-party vendors, or they want to do a hybrid approach. So keep stuff on site, on-prem, cloud, a little bit of both. So everyone has their own security for that. So cloud providers have theirs, data centers have theirs, and then their own facility and government regulations. So it makes it more complex.
Are there things that those organizations can do to try to mitigate that complexity, or is it just kind of the nature of the beast based on the infrastructure kind of framework that you just laid out?
Yeah, it's kind of a combination of what they're used to and all the new regulations that are coming out to meet that. So I think a lot of them have their own departments, people that's all they do is concentrate on that physical aspect and all the regulations to make sure that's what takes time to get a lot of this moving forward.
Do you expect to see more organizations in government thinking about transitioning back to data center environments, or do you think we've kind of reached that point of critical mass and the posture that a lot of agencies have now is what they'll have moving forward?
What I've seen lately, let's say the last 6 months at some of the other conferences, is some of the larger agencies are actually getting out of the data center business. And because they don't want to spend that money on CapEx, they want to save a lot of that money for operational costs. So they rather have providers like Equinix, who that's all we do, and let us worry about the CapEx and the infrastructure, and they want to use their money and budget for other items like cloud provider, hybrid cloud, and some of the infrastructure they're building themselves, but they want to get out of that business.
Mm-hmm. What do you think that looks like long term? Is that a trend you expect to see continue?
Honestly, with AI and all the demands and the megawatts and power and cooling, then quantum computing is kind of right behind that. So I would say that trend's probably going to stay.
Chris Stuntz of Equinix. One of the strategies I mentioned earlier that had people talking at TechNet Cyber is the Defense Department's software modernization strategy. Rob Vietmeyer is DoD's Chief Software Officer. He tells me why the department's put such a heavy emphasis on software.
So software is becoming an increasingly important part of the defense mission. So supporting this transformation, we've looked at everything from how do we optimize our infrastructure, our networks, our cloud environments. And if you think about cloud computing, it is really software-defined infrastructure. But then on top of that, how do we change our delivery model to take advantage of the modern approaches, DevSecOps, the level of automation and our software pipelines and platform engineering, all the sort of industry buzzwords. How do we really pull that together to support the defense mission? So we've set out at the CIO level a framework, a strategy, and guidance that we think allows the senior leaders across the department to take these approaches, to implement these approaches. We're adjusting our policies, our procedures, to really enable us to move faster, really driving change with how we operate with our industrial base. So we're here on the showroom floor now. There's a lot of amazing technologies all around us. And what we're really trying to do is how do we take advantage of what industry can bring us and change the model of how we're delivering systems using these modern DevSecOps and software factory types of approaches.
Mm-hmm. How do you build that into the way that the department does business when it's really kind of the opposite of the way that the department did business for so long?
That's been the hardest part of this journey. Is the technology is the easy part, right? We on the CIO side found that we can write guidance on here's the type of automation, here's the steps that a pipeline needs to implement, here's the tools that you need and how to configure those tools to deliver software securely. The challenge has been, changing the culture around that. And so part of the software modernization strategy, we found that we had to team with A&S and R&E and bring all of our superpowers together to really implement a comprehensive change approach for the department. And a key part of that has been working with A&S and then putting in place the software pathway for acquisition. Changing the rules by which we operate, changing from sort of our traditional waterfall model to now going to, software is never done. Systems never going to sustain it. You get a minimum viable capability out as soon as possible, continue to iterate and evolve that over time. So that brings a lot of interesting changes and second order effects that we're working on now, which is, includes how do we adapt the defense policies that were sort of built around the old acquisition model. We're updating those now. How do we work with industry and change our relationship? So we're no longer, spending 2 years on the government side writing requirements, then throwing those over the fence and waiting 2 years for industry to deliver against those. So how do we build these software factories where we're working together with industry partners to continuously evolve and update our capabilities based on mission needs?
The services have software operations. Danielle Metz in the Fourth Estate has software operation. How do you coordinate among all of those to avoid duplication of efforts, share best practices, and so on?
Well, the great thing about the software community has been software developers are lazy. They don't like duplicating something that's already been done. And so, from one level, the community has really formed grassroots interactions amongst themselves, what's called the Software Factory Coalition. And we have a bunch of different forums where we bring these teams together and we'll sit down and they sit down and solve the problems themselves. And how do we optimize? And so if someone has developed a really cool software test tool, then we could share it across the community. If someone's developed piece parts that we can put together, what you find happening is these communities are kind of like, how do we self-optimize? Because we want to be lazy, right? And one of the questions that keeps coming up is what's the right number of software factories? And from my perspective, it really is the wrong question. What we're looking at, if we took the number of IT systems we have and weapon systems in the department and said, how many are operating using modern methods? And how many are sort of still following, the legacy or in sustainment and not updating? I think we'll find that we have a lot of work to do. And so what we find in these software factories is we have to, many times they get optimized to the particular weapon system, the particular program that they're supporting. And then behind the scenes, what we have other software factories that are developing shared components that they can take advantage of. So we do have folks that are working CI/CD pipeline tooling. So if you wanted to rapidly stand up a CI/CD pipeline, you can push a button and someone's giving you the infrastructure's code and all the tools already integrated to go do that. And then you have the teams that are building for particular weapon systems, taking those components and then extending that to say, to deal with the differences between an F-16 or an F-22, you sort of have to start to customize your software and your testing frameworks for those platforms. So it's really an interesting ecosystem that's evolving. And so we're working very closely with the MilDep CIOs and their staffs to make sure that we are optimizing, that we are looking at how do we continue to evolve this effectively across the department? And what are our biggest gaps? Where are we having challenges? And how are we working together to solve those?
Rob Vietmeyer of DoD. Earlier in the program, I mentioned that a two-pronged discussion is happening around cyber and AI. Gina Cinta is Deputy Chief Technology Officer at Thales. She tells me how she's advising government agencies to think about those two prongs.
AI for cybersecurity, so you can leverage AI tools to do cybersecurity tasks. But then there's also the protection of the AI data, right? Because they can tamper with the data even in a real-time environment today. With an AI environment, it's just as susceptible. So it's about controlling access through identity access management, which is a part of Zero Trust, so it fits right in. And protecting the data through encryption, so you can put access controls. One of the conversations in the session this morning was about data tagging and the challenges of tagging the data correctly, because if it's not tagged correctly, you may not get the results you need to see based on your access.
Mm-hmm. What kind of questions did you get in your session? What are people asking you at your booth about? What are people asking about in the session that you hosted and so on? What do they want to know?
So they didn't ask, but they commented that that's the topic they've wanted to hear about.
I see.
And that's kind of why we developed that conversation, because in all the conferences I go to, I don't hear anyone talking about security around artificial intelligence. And it's for AI, it's with AI, and so there's a lot of different aspects of it.
Is there a difference between securing artificial intelligence tools and securing other types of applications, data, and so on? Or are the processes and procedures pretty much the same?
It's pretty much the same. It's all about data, right? And security of AI really is just another data use case. But you've got to know what you want to protect. And as you get more granular in what you're analyzing, that's when it becomes more sensitive, because then they'll know what you're looking for, right? And there's such a large volume of data. Not all data can be ingested into AI the way it is today, right? Whereas from a data protection standpoint, data today, whether it's unstructured in a file or a Excel spreadsheet or PDF or something, that can be encrypted today, no problem, or a database, right? But when you have to normalize that data in a way that it can be put into AI, then you're going to have to encrypt it again, right? So that it fits into the models that you're forming within the AI structure.
What do you see agencies struggling with or having a hard time with at that AI and security intersection, Gina?
Well, one of the terms I used this morning was move fast and fail hard, right?
Yeah.
So failure is, I always learn better when I fail or don't do it correctly than when it's done right the first time. So when you learn from that, then you go, okay, now I know how I need to do it the right way, right? And like I said, that data tagging is the biggest challenge in zero trust. It's that pillar that everybody is avoiding. And it's going to be a challenge in AI as well. But I think once they kind of figure it out from, their enterprise data today, then applying that to zero trust is going to be a lot easier. Applying it to AI is going to be a lot easier.
And zero trust is where I wanted to go next, how this all fits into all the things we've discussed, how they all fit into a zero trust effort like the Defense Department's undertaking.
Right. So there's 7 pillars in the DoD zero trust framework. The first one is identities, which identities is a part of AI because you've got to determine who's going to be authenticated in to have access to the data. And then there's, the encryption and protection of the data, which is across several pillars. Application security is right in there as well. And then network security, because you want to secure your network no matter what, whether it's an AI environment or your entire enterprise. So a lot of it's going to carry over and it'll assume it, but it's going to take time to really focus on that. It's all that data and getting the right data in the right format in the models that it can be used, right? But it's still going to need to be verified by humans, right? So it's like trust and verify. So I got to trust this information, but I've got to verify that it's correct.
Gina Cinta of Thales. Thanks for joining me for this Innovation in Government program from TechNet Cyber in Baltimore, presented by Carahsoft. If you missed any part of this program, you can watch the show in its entirety on our website at fedgovtoday.com or the FedGov Today YouTube channel. Don't miss FedGov Today TV every Sunday morning at 10:30 on ABC 7 in the D.C. area or on the FedGov Today YouTube channel. I'm Francis Rose. Thanks very much for watching. Have a great night.